He thought his allies had his back. He thought he could beat the sanctions. But in the last 48 hours, Putin's entire strategy has collapsed, thanks to a secret betrayal that just handed Ukraine its biggest economic victory yet. Stark and revealing contradiction is unfolding in Russia, exposing a significant gap between the confident image projected by Vladimir Putin and the grim economic realities being discussed openly within the country itself. Just days ago, President Putin addressed the nation in an emergency press conference, attempting to frame the latest wave of severe U.S. sanctions as a net positive for Russia. He argued that by restricting the supply of Russian oil on the global market, these measures would inevitably drive up world oil prices, thereby compensating Moscow for any reduction in sales volume. However, this optimistic narrative is being directly contradicted by a surprising source: Russian state television, often referred to as Kremlin TV. On the very channels that typically broadcast unwavering support for the government, analysts are now speaking with alarming candor about the severe economic headwinds facing the nation. This public airing of economic anxieties suggests that the situation is too dire to be hidden behind a veil of propaganda. The timing of this pessimistic media coverage is particularly embarrassing for the Kremlin, as it coincides with a major strategic blow to Russia's critical energy sector. One of the nation's largest and most important oil refineries, the Ryazan facility, which alone accounts for roughly 5% of Russia's total refined oil output, has been forced to suspend all operations. This shutdown is not due to mechanical failure or market forces, but is a direct result of a successful and sustained campaign of Ukrainian drone strikes. Over the past 12 months, Ukraine has systematically targeted Russia's refining capabilities, with the most recent attack on the Ryazan plant occurring just 2 days ago. The footage of the aftermath, billowing smoke and damaged infrastructure, serves as a potent symbol of Ukraine's ability to strike at the very heart of the Russian economy. This assault on Russia's domestic refining capacity creates a critical bottleneck. Russia typically refines about 30% of its crude oil domestically to produce more valuable products like gasoline and diesel. With key refineries like Ryazan crippled, this oil cannot be processed. Putin's initial workaround for this problem was to simply increase the export of this unrefined crude oil to friendly nations like China, India, and Turkey. While selling crude oil is less profitable than selling refined products, it was a necessary stopgap to keep revenue flowing into state coffers. Now, however, the new U.S. sanctions have effectively slammed shut this escape valve. By targeting Russia's two largest oil companies, the sanctions are creating immense difficulties in shipping and insuring this crude oil, making international buyers wary. Consequently, Putin is being squeezed from both sides, his domestic refining capacity is degraded, and his ability to export the raw crude as an alternative is being severely hampered. This pincer movement is strangling the lifeblood of the Russian economy, its energy exports. The reason this internal criticism is so significant is that it reveals a clear understanding within Russian elite circles of this dire predicament. In an attempt to get ahead of this damaging story, President Putin preemptively held his press conference. His central argument, that sanctions would be a boon by raising global oil prices, is a strategy that has worked before. Following the initial invasion of Ukraine in 2022, similar sanctions caused oil prices to skyrocket to over $100 per barrel, filling Russian war chests despite the international condemnation. But the geopolitical landscape has shifted dramatically since 2022. This time, Putin's calculus has been upended by a crucial factor: the betrayal of his Middle Eastern allies. OPEC+, the cartel led by Saudi Arabia and Russia itself, has just announced that it is prepared to increase its own oil production to compensate for any shortfalls caused by the removal of Russian oil from the market. This move is a devastating geopolitical blow, driven by pure self-interest. OPEC nations see an opportunity to capture Russia's market share and increase their own revenues, leaving Moscow isolated. The data confirms this failure of Putin's strategy. While oil prices have seen a minor increase from around $58 to $61 per barrel since the sanctions were announced, this is nowhere near the dramatic surge to over $100 that Russia desperately needs to make its strategy viable. At this price point, the modest increase does little to offset the catastrophic loss of volume, and it is unlikely to trigger the pain at American gas pumps that Putin was counting on to fracture Western resolve. As if this weren't enough, the United States and its NATO allies have signaled that this is only the beginning. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has explicitly outlined a multi-pronged strategy to systematically dismantle Russia's economic resilience, citing the successful Ukrainian drone campaign, efforts to disrupt Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, and the unwavering support of the U.S. administration. This escalating pressure explains a truly remarkable diplomatic development, the sudden arrival of a senior Russian envoy, Kyryl Dmitry, a figure rumored to be a potential successor to Putin, in the United States just one day after the sanctions were announced. His mission is transparent: to plead for relief, while publicly maintaining the official line that sanctions are not a big deal and blaming Ukraine for refusing to negotiate. His very presence in the U.S. tells a different story. It is a clear signal of the intense pressure the Kremlin is under. This blame-shifting, however, obscures the true nature of the diplomatic stalemate. The envoy claims Ukraine is dragging out the negotiations, but the reality is the opposite. Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire based on the current front lines. What it refuses to do is surrender. Russia's definition of negotiation is, in effect, a demand for Ukrainian capitulation. This fundamental disconnect brings to mind the timeless words of President Ronald Reagan, who argued that the only peace achieved through surrender is not peace at all, but subjugation. In conclusion, while sanctions may not cause the Russian economy to collapse overnight, they are applying a relentless and intensifying pressure. The visible cracks are everywhere: in the open worry on state television, in the burning wreckage of critical refineries, in the calculated betrayal of OPEC allies, and in the desperate diplomatic missions to Washington. The road ahead for Russia is one of increasing economic isolation and hardship, a direct consequence of a war it started, but is finding increasingly difficult to sustain. The situation is changing fast, so subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. We'll be breaking down Putin's response in our next video, and you won't want to miss it. Your support allows us to keep connecting the dots, so hit that button, and I'll see you in the next one.